Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, November 26, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David Dayen on the progressives' quest for congressional committee power. Power. Also on the program today, 13 agencies of the Trump administration releases a report saying that climate change is dire, and the administration vows to do nothing about it. Meanwhile, the U.S. Border Patrol tear gasses families to keep us safe. Standoff intensifies between Russia and Ukraine. Yemen peace talks set for December. Whatevs. Meanwhile, Trump far outpaced Obama in his 2-year drone campaign. And tomorrow, Mississippi will possibly elect an unrequited racist to the Senate. Simultaneously, the Senate will confirm an unrequited racist to the federal judiciary. Data shows, meanwhile, right-wing violence rising in the United States. And coincidentally, in a bid to regain old friends, Gavin McInnes quits the Proud Boys, pretends to do it for the Proud Boys. And what are the Proud Boys? They barely exist anyways. Meanwhile, how Trump protects Iranian-enabled terrorism, and a government shutdown looms as Dems look to protect the Mueller investigation. Lastly, Trump's recession watch. GM announces 15,000 layoffs. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. We are all back and rested. Well, we're not all back, but we're almost all back. Jamie is still stuck at the border, I think. I don't know. It's possible.
She's nowhere near Tijuana, is she?
I don't know. I do not know. It's possible. But I trust everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Matt, I heard that you got into an argument.
No, I was more just holding forth and didn't really realize it until I was told about it the next day, that I was a bit loudly talking about Disney and copyright in front of my friend's parents. So. Right.
Were they in any way associated with Disney, or was
no?
it just
they were sort of just innocent bystanders, but they seemed a bit.
Who were you talking to about
just
this?
Everyone in the room.
I love Matt's version of a drunken rant. Like when he's like at the holidays, he's sipped a little too much, and it's like a very genteel. It's like, yo, really gotta deal with the way Disney's just locking down our creative culture.
I mean, I probably am guilty.
It's like enlightened Steve Bannon. I love it.
I'm probably guilty of similar type of moments, but I'm just curious as to how one gets there.
I think it was because we were talking about Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is the guy, I forget what his name is, but he's very active on Twitter.
Joel,
yeah,
I can't remember now.
But he said it. We were talking about that, and then I mentioned his tweet about how Disney gave us copyright fascism and Mickey Mouse isn't funny, and just kind of use that as a launching off point.
Good. And Michael, did you have any sort of completely non sequitur style arguments with your
I did not
Thanksgiving?
actually. It was pretty mellow, to be
All right.
honest.
All right.
There's a fair amount of political agreement around the table.
There you
So the fights that we have, I won't report on in public.
Oh, I see. Okay. And Brendan, anything untoward happen at your Thanksgiving?
Very normal Thanksgiving at the Finn household, I gotta say.
All right. Well, good.
Dad, thank you for the meal. It's delicious. You're welcome, son. How's the city going? It's going
My-
well, Dad.
My son,
Brendan really brings the Gentile energy.
my
to
son
the
has
show.
entered into a stage where he just says he hates me constantly. Now,
Does he?
he's 5.
That's an early
but-
adapter.
Well, he's just joking. However, when his sister, who's 13, constantly says it, she's not. She's serious. She genuinely hates me. He just thinks it's funny to say that he hates me. And then I say, all right, Saul, I'm enough. I've had enough of the joke. I'm not feeling so great about this. And he goes, can I keep calling you butt?
And do you let him, or do you cuck out of
Yeah, no, I say butt's okay. I get that. That's a term of endearment. He's like, okay, butt.
that? He's a funny kid.
Yeah, he actually has a sense of humor. If he's funnier than Gavin McGinnis, but we'll get to that later. So meanwhile, while we were all enjoying our families, there were families at the border, several hundreds of people. I don't know what the percentage of families were. Some were families. Some were just children of parents, or some were just parents of children. And they have traveled through Mexico. They were at the border attempting to cross. And then, of course, you needed to disperse them to protect this country. You understand, these people, some of them had rocks. Some of them may be trained in martial arts. We don't know. And so we need to protect ourselves. And, of course, what did the Border Patrol do? Well, they fired high-density pepper spray and tear gas, according to the AP. There were some who, this according to the AP, U.S. border agents fired tear gas on hundreds of migrants protesting near the border with Mexico after some of them attempted to get through the fencing and wire separating the two countries. American authorities shut down the nation's busiest border crossing from the city where thousands were waiting to apply for asylum. Mexican police had kept the migrants from walking over a bridge leading to the Mexican port of entry, but migrants pushed past officers to walk across the Tijuana River below the bridge. Migrants walked along the river to an area where only earthen levee and concertina wire separated them from U.S. Border Patrol agents. And an AP reporter saw U.S. agents shoot several rounds of tear gas after some migrants attempted to penetrate along several points along the border. And here is some guy on Fox and Friends. This is Ron Colburn. Colburn is from the Border Patrol Foundation. He's the president of the foundation that supports the Border Patrol. I'm not sure what they do.
Is that tax-deductible organization?
I would imagine. Everybody's got to work, folks. And here he is going on Fox and Friends to explain all we did with the little kids is put a little pepper in their eyes.
There was a small hole they were able to puncture through the border wall, and they hurled all sorts of rocks, etc., at the Border Patrol agents, and then they fired the tear gas. Is that warranted?
Absolutely. And to clarify, the type of deterrent being used is OC pepper spray. It's literally water, pepper, with a small amount of alcohol for evaporation purposes. It's natural. You could actually put it on your nachos and eat it. So it's a good way of deterring people without long-term harm.
Oh, so those Mexican and Honduran and Guatemalan people could put it on their nachos.
They should be saying gracias.
Yes. Gracias.
That's what I say. Gracias.
Unbelievable. Couldn't miss the opportunity.
Couldn't miss out. Can I just interject something briefly here? It just occurred to me. I know we don't really debate the use of the word fascism on this show that much, but I think we're all basically on the same page. But it's like a manufactured fake crisis, which is the caravan, and then the actual barbarism of this is, I mean, you're starting to get extremely textbook now.
Very textbook. Very textbook. Here's some photos of some of those lucky migrants who are able to get some of that pepper spray and I guess theoretically put it on their nachos. As you can see, the kids are in diapers, and that's the most dangerous type of child, I can tell you that. And there's the mom wearing the Frozen T-shirt, which is also, obviously incredibly dangerous to the American people. And I think actually in the background, yeah, there you go. You can actually see a stroller back there across the ravine there.
Crisis child actors.
Yes, of course. And thank God we're being protected from these folks. Listen, we don't need more children running around in strollers. I can tell you that. Coming from Stroller Central in Brooklyn, I'm very, very glad that we are firing pepper spray at parents and their children so that they can't make their way up here and endanger all of us.
I've advocated that in front of Q train stops.
Oh, yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, here's Thomas Homan. He is the former acting director of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And I think he's now still the executive director now of ICE?
He stepped down, but there's speculation that he will take over for Nielsen when she's puts in her.
So, of course, he's going back on Fox News.
Strength.
Yes. And here he is saying that that these asylum seekers, this is all just a game for these people.
There's heartache when you see those pictures. There's the rule of law the president continues to hammer down on. How do you address both?
Incidentally, the rule of law would also have Jared Kushner and others in prison right now for their disclosure forms. The rule of law not so rigid when you get to that point.
Yeah, going back to our discussion on fascism, when rule of law is invoked, maybe start to wonder, does this look like fascism opportunistically using the law?
I mean, it's a shame that those people had to have children to make it so dramatic when they were getting pepper sprayed. Here we go.
Well, first of all, I've said many times, I certainly feel bad for the plight of these people, but they're not asylum. They're not true asylum seekers. They don't qualify under existing law to claim asylum because they want to come here. You've seen them.
Pause it. A funny thing about existing law, and you keep bringing up fascism. I'm not going to say what country it was and when, but what they managed to do was all legal because they changed the laws to make it legal to oppress certain minorities in their country. Now, you'll recall that Jeff Sessions changed, not so much the law, the regulations, I guess you could call it, but more or less the same, on what constituted a legitimate ask for asylum. We simply changed it. We simply basically banned all the reasons why you could seek asylum if you were coming from Central America. Domestic abuse, gang violence, the fact that your country was almost non-functioning in terms of dealing with crime and violence, that your child or your husband was murdered by a gang and you were under threat and there was no recourse in your own country. We just simply said it's no longer a legit reason for asylum. But let's listen to the game that's being played.
asylum because they want to come here. You've seen them, they're carrying signs, I want a job. That doesn't qualify for asylum, so I certainly understand the plight of these people. I can certainly understand them want to be a part of this country, but there's a legal way to do it, and they're not following the legal process. They're using the asylum.
They are using the exact legal process, which is you go up to the border, you say, I am seeking asylum, and then we have a legal process to determine whether or not your claim warrants asylum. That is the only legal process to get asylum for these people. Are they all have legitimate claims? Statistically, no. But we don't know which ones do. And that's why you have a legal process that is edified in U.S. law to make that determination. Theoretically, this guy knows it.
They're using the asylum system, which harms real true asylum seekers that really are escaping fear and persecution. But on your first point about the women and children escaping tear gas, we got to look at the facts here. A minority of this caravan, a small minority, is actually family members, women and children. Most of them are adult males. But the media, some of the media out there are getting shots of the women and children to try to pull at the heartstrings of America. And, you know, and even the caravan itself, the people that are coordinating this whole event, they'll put the women and children up front to make it seem like this is 5,000 women and children when it's not. They're playing the game. Some of the media outlets are playing the game. This is a vast majority of males seeking employment in the United States, not women and children.
Now, of course, males don't have families. We know this. Right? They're not family members. They're just males. They're just males looking for work, looking for probably very, very fancy and exotic jobs.
I'd actually suggest that it's some pretty anti-male chauvinism right there.
Not to raise money for their families because, of course, they're males and couldn't possibly have families.
No, I have no family. I'm here to start a Patreon.
Right, exactly.
I want to become a YouTuber and abandon my family. So that'll be asylum, please.
What does Homan have against males?
Yeah, what does he have against men? It sounds like it's a war on men from Fox News headquarters.
This is apropos. 2018 has been difficult for human rights, a difficult year for human rights. But if you ever wonder how rights and abuses are documented around the world, you probably have with the sheer volume of global crisis we're seeing, from civilian casualties in Syria to ethnic cleansing in Myanmar to the caging of children on U.S. borders. It's critical we expose the truth in order to defend the rights of all and bring those responsible to justice. Human Rights Watch does just that. They're an independent nonprofit organization known for their accurate fact-finding, impartial reporting, and targeted advocacy, often in partnership with local activists and human rights groups. They accept no money from any government. They rely on the support of informed, dedicated people just like you. So if human rights are important to you, visit hrw.org/majority to make a donation and support its vital work around the world. When you do, not only is your gift tax deductible, it will be matched dollar for dollar until 2019. That means your donation will go twice as far to advance justice and defend the basic dignity of people who need it most. Again, that's hrw.org/majority. I should tell you, for what it's worth, that Human Rights Watch is going to be one of those charities that I let the kids pick a couple out of a list. One night during Hanukkah, don't get presents. You get to decide where your present money is going to go. And that's going to be one of them. I'll talk about the other ones maybe later in the week as we prep for Hanukkah. Also, this also makes a great gift. Saul and I were literally arguing about this morning when he crawled into bed. There is no need to suffer through another sleepless night. Calming Comfort by Sharper Image is the luxurious weighted blanket that helps you relax so you can fall asleep and stay asleep naturally. It's designed with high-density comfort fill to provide exactly the right amount of weight to help relax your body. It mimics the soothing feeling of being hugged and helps the production of serotonin and melatonin. I'm laughing because Saul literally is like, oh, can I have that blanket? I just put it, it's so cozy.
Come on, bud. Come
50,
on.
Yeah, exactly. Weighs 15 pounds. And he's like, I like it. And I'm like, what do you like about it? I can't move. You can't move. So you can sleep better, feel great, stress less. Plus, made with super soft velveteen material, Calming Comfort is 100% machine washable and dryer safe. It's like, it's like, I don't know I guess they call it velveteen, but it's that like, cuddly material for blankets. The material itself is not heavy. There are like squares in it that are full of like a heavy fill. It's I would not have thought, I guess I would have thought about it. I've layered, a bunch of heavy blankets on. That's the way I like to sleep, cold with a bunch of heavy blankets on. This does it for you. The Calming Comfort weighted blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free, stress-free, best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com. That's calmingcomfortblanket.com. Use the promo code majority at checkout to receive 15% off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code majority. And because you can't put a price on a great night's sleep, go online now. calmingcomfortblanket.com. Use the promo code majority for your special discount. And lastly, today's support for today's show comes from Blue Apron. Blue Apron delivers fresh, perfectly portioned ingredients you can use to cook incredible restaurant-quality meals in as little as 20 minutes, right to your door. Just choose from a variety of step-by-step chef-designed recipe options, all with insanely delicious flavors. Then get rid of your grocery list. Let Blue Apron do the meal prep for you. Whether you're looking for quick and easy meals or a full culinary experience, Blue Apron has you covered. Folks, I've been talking about Blue Apron for a couple of years now. We were customers before. It's a total coincidence that they started to. I should have probably made it not a coincidence, but it was a total coincidence they started advertising on this show. I've talked about some of my favorite meals. Immediately, I think of Blue Apron. I think of, I don't even know what it's called. It's like it's not a mapo tofu, but some type of like round Asian, almost like a pasta, and pork. Oh God, now I can't even stop. But they now have like quicker to prepare meals, which are super helpful for me, being a single dad 50% of the time. So check out this week's menu. Get your first 3 meals free. I don't know why anybody wouldn't do this. You get your first 3 meals free. Check it out. You're going to love the food. You're going to love the fact that you're going to be able to cook a home-cooked meal without ever worrying about shopping for it, coming up with the recipes. It's perfect. BlueApron.com/majority. That's BlueApron.com/majority. Get your first 3 meals free. Blue Apron, a better way to cook. All right, quick break. When we come back, David Dayen. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is always a pleasure to welcome back to this program a reporter for, well, he reports for The Intercept. He writes for every major magazine that you've ever read, I would say. Also, author of Chain of Title, perhaps I don't want to say the seminal, but one of the seminal books on the 2008 financial crisis that started with housing. And my understanding is he's writing another book. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's about. But David Dayen, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thank you.
I hope your Thanksgiving was good.
It was just fine.
Okay, all right. I'm glad to hear that. Always happy.
How was yours, Sam?
Oh, you don't even want me to go into it.
Okay.
No, it was good. It was good. Mine was fine.
Okay.
But so I'm glad we got that over with. That was That could have been uncomfortable.
It could have been. It's not.
David, let's get into this. I read it. I read this piece last week. I wanted you on last week, and then I was like, I don't want it to get buried in Thanksgiving hoo-ha. Right. You wrote this piece in The Intercept. I find it fascinating because so much of politics is reduced to who are we going to elect to office, and there are two other major elements. One, from the perspective of citizens, we should be doing activism to get our elected representatives to do what we want them to do, in addition to building communities, et cetera, et cetera. The other is, what are these electeds doing on the inside? Because so much of what happens in our government, and it makes sense, right, that it's going to be complicated and somewhat opaque from your average viewer, reader, listener, because we have a huge country, and it is, it's like riding a bull in some respects. So you wrote about one of the power plays by the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the run-up to the leadership challenge for Nancy Pelosi, which is still ongoing. But, all right, tell us, just set the table for us. How big is the Congressional Progressive Caucus before the election, after the election?
Before the election, I believe there are 77 members of the Progressive Caucus, and they actually picked up 2 shortly after the election, current members who decided to join. After the election, I mean, this is kind of an interesting question because I think the membership is going to be more based, it's going to mean something a little more in this incoming Congress than it may have in past Congresses. I mean, you literally have a handful of members who are members of the Progressive Caucus and the New Democrats, which are the centrist sort of rival to the Progressive Caucus. So the Progressive Caucus in the last decade has been sort of more a badge you can wear. It's, hey, I'm progressive. I'm a member of the Progressive Caucus. Don't bother me. Now it's going to mean something a little more directly, I feel, and in my discussions with people in the know about this. It's going to mean that your votes are going to have to be a certain way. It's going to mean that you're going to have to provide a little more support for certain positions. So they think when that all shakes out, even though there are about 20 incoming members that are likely to join, there are probably going to be some drop-offs from members who want to sort of say they're progressive but don't want to really be voting in a manner consistent with the Progressive Caucus. So, all right, well,
how does that? What's the mechanism?
What's that?
So what's that mechanism? So Mark Pocan,
right.
Pramila Jayapal, others in the leadership.
What's the mechanism for enforcing that? I mean, I think it's the same as the mechanism for enforcing sort of the Freedom Caucus. I mean, you vote our way or we don't support you in your election. And considering that a Progressive Caucus member, Mike Capuano, lost his election to an up-and-coming member, Ayanna Pressley, and others seemingly would be on the radar in this next Congress. I think that's a somewhat credible threat. So, there's going to be a bit of a shakeout, but bottom line is about 40% of the caucus is Progressive Caucus. 40% of House Democrats are going to be in the Progressive Caucus in the new congressional term.
Okay, so 40%, that's a pretty big, if they are voting.
Big number.
It's a big number, and it's an important number if they're voting as a block, right? I mean, if they are, and presumably, right, they're coming up with at least, maybe they don't write it down, or maybe they do, but with basically a scoring mechanism. These votes that you need, we need you to take these votes. If you don't take these votes, we give you a C- or a D or an F. And if we give you an F, we're going to be out there, or even a D, we're going to be out there and we're going to be supporting a progressive challenger to you in your district. And so that makes a big difference if you're voting like a block, right? It doesn't even matter. I mean, your size is less relevant. And the Freedom Caucus,
Freedom Caucus was 30 people.
Yeah.
I mean,
so we're talking.
Freedom Caucus we're talking about a third of what the Progressive Caucus is likely to look like. And now it's not going to be quite as cohesive as the Freedom Caucus. I think that's pretty clear. But even if it's minimally cohesive, given the margins in the Democratic in the House next year, you don't need that many to swing votes.
Right. Okay. So Progressive Caucus is anew. And so what was their first sort of like, I don't know if it was their first, but it feels like it was their first real exercise of this, I don't want to say authority, but this power.
Yeah, this was a definite power play. So, we have this leadership sort of battle with Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi needs not only a majority of Democrats in the House to vote for her this week, to be their nominee for Speaker. But on the floor, because of the way it's structured, she needs a majority of all members in order to get the Speaker nod, which means she needs virtually every Democrat to vote for her on the floor in order to become Speaker. And that gives members some power to dictate terms. And the Progressive Caucus knew this, sought this, had a meeting with Pelosi where they said, hey, look, we're 40% of this caucus. However, we don't get 40% of the seats, particularly on key committees. And 4 of them are domestic, and then 1 of them is separate, and we'll talk about them separately. But the 4 domestic policy committees through which virtually all domestic legislation runs, we're talking about the Appropriations Committee, which sets the funding and appropriates money. We're talking about the Ways and Means Committee, which is mainly tax policy and trade. We're talking about the Energy and Commerce Committee, where healthcare legislation and climate legislation would go through. And we're talking about the Financial Services Committee, which is financial regulation and housing policy and all sorts of other things. So those 4 committees, and then separately the Intelligence Committee, which only has 1 Progressive Caucus member out of its 9. The other 4 are all under that 40% marker. And the Progressive Caucus said, we want 40% representation. We want proportional representation on all of these committees. And Pelosi said, yes, you can get that. We will restructure so that you get that committee proportional representation. And that's a very big deal because these are the places where this legislation will initiate. When you're thinking about almost everything that progressives are moving to want, whether it's legislation on prescription drugs, legislation on single-payer health care or Medicare buy-in, legislation on a Green New Deal. I mean, you name it. It's all going to go through these committees. So if you don't have the people, you're not going to get your stuff through.
All right, explain that dynamic, because I'm not sure that folks understand. I mean, more or less, people know. You have a bill, and then it becomes a law, and then it gets signed by the president.
I need to do a little Schoolhouse Rock here.
Please, you don't have to sing, but
the committee structure is very important in that. There are committees of jurisdiction. I mean, look, much of Congress is turf wars, right? If you have legislation on health care, the committee in the House, there are actually 2, the Energy and Commerce and the Ways and Means Committee. They're going to say, well, we're taking that bill. We get that bill, and we decide whether to mark it up. We decide what to do with this bill. Anybody can introduce a bill, but it goes into one of those committees. And if it has to do with taxes, if there's any kind of financing for it, Ways and Means is going to look at it. if it has to do with all sorts of issues, whether it's healthcare or climate or whatever, Energy and Commerce is going to look at it, and that's where the baseline bill begins. I mean, things can be done on the floor of the House, although we don't see that very much anymore. But the committees really control the legislation. And where they begin is critical to where they end. And where they begin is in those committees.
And this is where the bills get formed. I mean, you have you can
That's right.
you can introduce a bill, but it goes through essentially a sausage factory, as it were.
That's
and,
right.
And it
and
comes
this
out
is
the other
where
end.
the factory is, and there aren't enough progressives in those factories. And so this was the power play to get the proportional amount of progressive caucus members in those committees doing the work to shape that legislation. We've learned from history here. After 2008, when we had the Dodd-Frank legislation, turned out that a lot of these freshmen and sophomore congressmen who won in 2006 and 2008, who were blue dogs and new Democrats, they flocked to the Financial Services Committee, and they got to shape that legislation, which was actually far worse in the House than it ended up being in the Senate, which is the opposite of what you would think, because the Senate is, people who senators come from states, supposed to be more moderate. Actually, they were better on that bill because the committee was stacked with New Dems and Blue Dogs who go there because it's a source of funds. The lobbyists control or are interested, let's say, in all of these money committees, and they will spend money to influence them. And it was commonplace for Democrats to put these New Dems, they call the frontline members who need to raise a lot of money to retain their seats on these committees for access to those lobbyist donations. So that we know that affected Dodd-Frank. We know that made Dodd-Frank worse, and progressives didn't want to see that happen again. So this is not just for now, right? Because you get seniority, you move up through the committees. The more longer that you've been on one, the more opportunity you have to influence legislation. This is not just for now. This is for far into the future. When we have a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, to have progressives in these positions will change the face of the legislation that ultimately comes out.
And people should understand this dynamic. It works. I mean, the idea that these New Dem types, right, would flock to these committees that control the money, and then moneyed interests will bankroll their reelection campaigns and presumably in some instances spend against any opponents and whatnot. There's also a flip side to this in that, like, these committees are not that sexy from a progressive standpoint in attracting the same money because, the whole point is that Wells Fargo is not going to see, let's just use her as an example, AOC on the Financial Services Committee and go like, oh, this is going to be we're going to shower her with cash, right? This is not going to happen. Meanwhile, I guess I don't know, the Greenpeace, I don't know how big their lobby is. There's something. But the Greenpeace, to the extent that they can get their members to vote for somebody, is not going to vote for somebody who's on the financial services. They're going to do it for somebody who's presumably on a climate change committee.
Right, like the new one that AOC is trying to set up. The money quote on this is something that Alex Lawson, who's been working on this project, he's a guy with Social Security Works, but he's been working sort of in a sort of freelance capacity on this committee assignment situation. Here's what he said to me. He said, progressives come into Congress wanting to change the world. and new Democrats come into Congress wanting to be on the Ways and Means Committee. Like, they're very targeted in what they know they can do to really influence what gets done in Washington. And progressives come in, a lot of them were civil rights lawyers or worked in law firms. They flock to the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee has 75% of its Democratic membership are members of the Progressive Caucus. It's almost like everybody hangs with their people. It's easier to get things done on the Judiciary Committee if all of the members, or practically all of them, are progressives. It's easier to get things done on the other committees if a majority of the members are new Dems. And so it's almost like the Jets and the Sharks. They got to keep to themselves. And progressives have not really told that story of the importance of these committees maybe until now. And the problem that they're running into is twofold. So the first problem is what you just described. It's just not sexy to talk about derivatives regulation or overnight repo agreements. It's not what progressive members of Congress sort of feel that they came into Congress to do necessarily. And so it's hard to get new members excited about being on these committees. And so the only other reserve there are existing members and getting them to shift committees so that you can get to this 40% level. And that becomes hard because of the seniority factor. So if you spent 10 years on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and you're seeing this incoming Congress and the sort of remote but possibility of an infrastructure bill coming in, why would you want to switch off that committee to start over, essentially, on the Ways and Means Committee, where you don't have seniority and you don't have as much ability to affect the ultimate outcome as you would as a somewhat senior member on a different committee? So you get into that, and then there are other sort of political factors. Regional diversity plays a role in this. They don't want multiple members from the same state or the same region on one committee. You need sort of a sponsor within the committee if you want to switch or join it to sort of be your guide to make sure you can get onto it and get past the chairman or chairwoman.
Let's just talk about that for 1 second. The sponsor. Just tease that out for us, because it seems to me that you've got a problem if there is guess presumably, right, there's a member of the Progressive Caucus on all of these committee who could theoretically be the sponsor.
That's correct.
Okay, so what
But the question is, what influence they have? What is their relationship with the chair of that committee, and how does this all end up working out? It's like a Tetris situation to slot all these people in the right place, like a giant seating chart for your wedding. Tons of people can't sit next to each other. How do you do it? And how aggressive are those existing members going to be in helping get new members on? Now, we know that the new Democrats do this as a matter of routine. We learned in the course of our reporting that Josh Gottheimer, who's a second-term Democrat centrist member of the Problem Solvers Caucus.
I was going to ask you about them.
I think he's the co-chair of it, actually. That Gottheimer is being that sponsor. He's actually going out and recruiting people to be on the Financial Services Committee. The Financial Services sector did yeoman work in spending money to get him elected in 2016. He beat Scott Garrett out in New Jersey, who was a pretty right-wing guy. And Gottheimer has voted pretty reliably with the financial services sector throughout his first term, and going into his second term, he's trying to get more people who think like him onto the committee. So you have, in addition to what the Progressive Caucus is trying to do, the New Democrats are doing what they always do, which is try to maximize their power on these money committees to really influence the inside of legislation.
And so how is it going? I mean, first of all, who cut the deal with Pelosi? I mean,
So that's Pocan and Jayapal had the meeting where they agreed to increase the membership of the Progressive Caucus on these committees. But it's almost like, once they say that they have a handshake deal, you got to bring the horses now. You got to close that deal. You have to find the members willing to switch, or find the new members willing to go on these committees and submit them to the leadership. There's a whole process by which committee assignments get doled out. It's the Steering and Policy Committee, which it really is just the speaker. I mean, Pelosi is the chair of the Steering and Policy Committee. And when you're talking about the Intelligence Committee, Pelosi actually doesn't even go through that. She appoints members herself. So it's really about bringing that package over to the leadership and saying this is who we have willing to do it. And it's kind of mixed right now. There's a lot of hemming and hawing. It's very fluid. I've heard stories of members saying that they would switch and then changing their minds within a 24-hour period. It's extremely fluid, and it's difficult because it's just not historically what the Progressive Caucus has been focused on. Certainly not what progressives on the outside have been focused on. Committee assignments is not something that has historically been a rallying cry from progressives nationwide. And it's a difficult thing because it's an inside kind of deal. It's hard to influence. But, I was hoping to at least shed some more light on the process and show that, it's not enough just to get elected. There has to be a willingness to govern on the part of liberals and progressives in Congress. And this is right at the heart of that.
There has to be, I guess, on some measure, some level of sacrifice of,
Yeah.
I just remember in college, I had a government professor, and I don't know if I should say too much because he was always worried about it, but it was years and years ago. He was sort of, I think, conservative leaning. As a young man, he had served as an attorney for as part of the Peace Corps for I cannot remember what country it was, but somewhere perhaps in Indonesia, and he stopped the U.S. government from doing weapons testing in or around this country.
Mm-hmm.
And he, I was talking to him about where I was thinking about going to law school, and I was saying something like Antioch or something like that at the time, and he goes, "Look, you can go to a school like that, but the bottom line is if you're going to go in and actually help the clients that you want to help, you've got to learn the less sexy things and go in and actually, play the game as it is so that you can win it for, have the causes." And that's basically what this dynamic is. Go in, do the less sexy stuff on these committees where it's also going to make your job a little bit harder to raise money. Theoretically, you're not going to go to the town hall, nobody goes to the town hall and says, "I'm on the financial services committee," or "I'm on the energy and commerce committee. Vote for me. I'll impact real change." I mean, voters just don't necessarily know about this or respond.
They don't connect it. They don't connect it. But we've been here before in our history. So do you remember the book The Liberal Hour, which talked about policymaking in the Kennedy and Johnson eras? One of the huge sticking points was the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee, which sets the terms for debate and what gets onto the floor and how it gets administered, was run at that time by a segregationist. So there was no way to get civil rights legislation through. And also it was very difficult to get social policy legislation through because of the fears that if you pass Medicare, then African Americans might actually get better health care too. So I mean, it was a serious problem. And what they eventually did is they expanded the number of people on the Rules Committee through a rulemaking, and that allowed that segregationists who ran the committee to be outvoted routinely. So that was the key that unlocked all kinds of great society legislation in the 1960s. And so here we are again, where progressives have to figure out a way to get influence in Washington, and it means being, as you said, taking that sacrifice, which it really is, particularly if you're an existing member. To be on one of these committees, yeah.
How do because you're basically giving up all your seniority. I mean, everything,
Right.
that's a big currency in Congress.
It's huge,
and not just in terms of self-esteem, but literally, you get on a committee because you think you're going to deliver for your district, and you build that seniority so you can continue to deliver material benefits for your district. And when you can't do that anymore, it becomes somewhat problematic. I mean, on some level, there is a quality in Democratic politics where we're seeing a more nationalization on some level, right? Like things like Medicare for all. All the Democrats, not all, a huge percentage of the Democrats, maybe 50 some odd percent, maybe more, ran on that one proposal, which is pretty unique as far as I can recall, at least in modern times, with the Democrats running. Maybe it was against the war in 2006, but this is, in terms of a policy, it's rare to see, the sort of organic nationalization of particularly in midterms. All right, so
and it's difficult to think about. I mean, it's difficult to really project, because you can even go more into the weeds here and talk about subcommittees. So, like, Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders last week put out this legislation that would force compulsory licensing of prescription drugs if the price point in the United States is larger than a basket of prices for prescription drugs around the world in 5 different industrialized countries. So that's great, but the head of the subcommittee on health could very well be this woman named Anna Eshoo, who's based in the Silicon Valley area, who is an avowed supporter of the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries. She would never let that legislation come before her subcommittee. It just would not happen. So it's one thing to write a bill, but it's quite another to make sure that bill has a chance at becoming law. And it's hard to sort of get your head around that stuff, but that's the way, if you're thinking toward the future and you're thinking about actually getting action accomplished, that's the way you have to start to think about Congress.
So how is like Pocan and Jayapal? How are they
trying to?
How are they executing this? I mean, it's sort of almost like
So
a prisoner's dilemma in some level.
It's about one-on-one talks with members, both from the Progressive Caucus leadership themselves, and also from outside groups. We're talking about progressive groups, labor groups, various advocates, whether it's in healthcare or financial services or what have you, talking to members, saying, we know this is a sacrifice. We know this is hard. We will have your back. We will, and also it's just sort of talking to people on these committees and trying to get them involved and making it sort of a bigger ask, saying, if your legislation on drug prices can be passed, then you're going to need people willing to vote for it. So you're going to have to do your job to get people onto this committee. So it's very complex. It's very fragile, but it's all relationships and communication at this point to try to get people to do it.
And so what do we do? Like, I mean, people who hear this story, I mean, how do we influence this? I mean, I guess the only thing that comes to mind right now, and maybe this is just my own lack of imagination, is, Act Blue funds, like, not unlike the Susan Collins one, right? Like that are not earmarked to a
Here's
person.
some money for you if you go onto the Ways and Means Committee.
Yeah, here's the Ways and Means Committee fund. Anybody who goes on Ways and Means Committee will get a portion of this fund. Here's the one for financial services. I mean, is that?
Well, I don't know that those discussions are being had, but I, you can certainly do that yourself with your giant audience here. But I think one way for the outside to affect this, it's very hard because it really is an inside deal, is just by publicizing it. So the fact that it's out there now that progressives are having, these difficulties mustering the 40%, that gives a little more leverage to the caucus leadership to say, look, we can't make this deal with Pelosi and then not deliver.
Right.
Like that would be the end of us. It creates a lot more pressure around it to know that yes, this is what's going on, and yes, there is some difficulty. And I would say if you're listening and you have a lawmaker who represents you that is a member of the Progressive Caucus, go check out what committees they're on. And if they're not on the committees that I've just described, the money committees, Ways and Means, Appropriations, Energy and Commerce, Financial Services, give them a call and say, I would really like it if you got on these committees that are at the core of progressive policy over not just the next Congress, but Congresses to come. And the same thing for incoming members who probably haven't named a committee yet. But if you voted for someone who you think is or who ran on saying they were going to be a member of the Progressive Caucus, they were going to be a progressive legislator, call them and say, what committee are you going on? Here's what I want out of that. So
I will
there's some room for the outside.
I will say this, that if every office that you just talked about in that universe got 10 phone calls about the committee assignments, that would represent such an incredible increase.
That would be 10 more than they've ever gotten before.
Yeah, and honestly, the way the algorithms work, 10 phone calls represents an enormous number of their percentage of their constituents.
It's a lot, and yeah, I think that I haven't seen a coordinated campaign around that, but from an uncoordinated perspective, that should definitely be part of this. That there should be a lot of pressure on these lawmakers to make sure that the caucus, the House Democrats, are represented on these important committees in a way commensurate with the beliefs of the caucus.
All right, let me just lay this out one more time, and I got one more question to ask you about the Problem Solvers Caucus. But so people should understand, you're in a district, you look and you see what your congressperson is serving on. They're not on one of these committees. All you need to do is literally tell 4 friends, I want you to call this number over the next 3 days and say, I want you to get on one of these committees. It's really important so that you can fulfill the deal. You're going to have a material impact in a way that is so outsized because of this. So people have something to do here, and you can do it. It'll be super easy, and your return on investment could possibly be huge. All right.
You can do it, and I would say you need to do it really quick because this thing is going to be wrapped up by the end of the lame duck session in a few weeks.
All right, so folks, get on that.
You need to do it if you do it.
All right, so let me just ask you, you mentioned the Problem Solvers. The Problem Solvers are a so-called bipartisan caucus of, 20 members, 30 members.
Something like that.
They are basically kick the can, pay down the debt. What are those guys called? I can't remember now. Pete Peterson. What's the no labels? And
no labels.
No labels.
They're funded by no labels, guys.
And then in this instance, they have a label. It's Problem Solvers, but that's okay. It's not really a label. And so these Problem Solvers, they basically went to Nancy Pelosi. You will not get our votes. Again, the threshold, I think Nancy Pelosi can afford to have about 15 people in the House. Maybe it's 16. I don't know the exact numbers. Not vote for her, Democrats, before she has to rely on Republican votes to become Speaker of the House, and then things get a little bit complicated. These problem solvers are trying to leverage it, just like the Progressive Caucus did for these committee seats. They have asked for essentially rules changes that are extremely weedy, it seems to me, about how laws get made, who has an opportunity to mark them up, in what processes. Broadly speaking, what is the gist of this? I read those, and I just don't have the expertise to say, hey, I can see what they're doing here.
I haven't followed it totally closely because this kind of developed over the holiday and I wasn't really available.
How dare you?
I know. But my understanding is that the big ask that they're making is that anything that has some sort of bipartisan agreement, any amendments, needs to get a vote on the floor as part of legislation. Now, I don't know if that amendment has to be germane to the legislation. Is it if there's some bipartisan deficit reduction thing? Does it have to go into a parks bill? I don't know, but there's a mechanism by which amendments, bipartisan amendments in particular, would get votes on the floor of Congress, really subverting the committee process, by the way. Going around that and moving it forward. So, this is something that you could obviously see as not befitting the will of the majority of the caucus. Sometimes it's kind of puzzling where this what it would ultimately mean. But it's a way to get, conservative, democratic, or moderate, or whatever you want to call it, priorities at the forefront of legislation in the next term, whether or not it has support from the entire caucus. Now, I could see both sides having a problem with this, with Democratic leadership and Republican leadership. Republican leadership doesn't necessarily want these kind of ideas that don't have full support within their own caucus getting these votes. They're as ideologically rigid as anybody. So I could see a lot of people having a problem with this, and Pelosi is, she's in a tough spot. She, as you said, needs pretty much everybody on the Democratic side to support her. And so she's got to make these deals. Now, she's been pretty skillful, I would say. And, as a last resort, what she could do with this Problem Solvers Caucus is say, all right, go ahead. You're going to vote against me? You really want to do that? You're going to risk a primary in your district because you didn't support the Democrat for Speaker, and you set up a process whereby a Republican is the Speaker of the House after Democrats won the majority? You really want to do that? Go ahead. We've already seen the letter that was signed, I guess, by 16 members saying they wouldn't support Pelosi on the floor. We've already seen that, two people, Brian Higgins and Stephen Lynch, already sort of waver and say, yeah, I'll probably support her on the floor. There could be a bluff called if there's not a way to resolve the situation. Generally speaking, Democrat or any kind of leadership in the House doesn't want a situation where amendments that are sort of beyond their control end up getting votes. There's a lot to be said for an open process and let the sort of will of the majority work its way. But typically, leadership thinks about the next election and thinks about the hard votes that their members have to take. So, we'll see what happens. But I think Pelosi has played this generally pretty well. Most people know she's going to be Speaker, and I don't know that this is a credible threat.
I guess we'll see. David Dayen, fascinating stuff. People can read about what we've talked about in your piece at The Intercept from the 21st. We will put a link to it at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube descriptions, all that. David Dayen, always a pleasure.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Oh, wait, what's your new book? When's that coming out?
Oh, so, well, I don't know exactly a date when it's coming out, but I am going to do something on monopoly and the impact of corporate concentration on everyday life and everyday people. So a lot of books have come out recently.
Where are you going to sell it? On Amazon? Good luck, buddy.
Pal's Books, man. A lot of books have come out about sort of the aggregate statistics and antitrust policy and things. This is going to be more a book about how people are affected on a daily basis. So.
Looking forward to it. David
All
Dayen,
right.
always a pleasure.
See ya.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye. David Dayen. I would pre-order that book right now, but I don't think it's even available for pre-order. I don't even started writing it yet.
If he hasn't started writing it yet, a couple weeks he'll be done.
The way
guy
that
is a machine.
He's a machine. It's unbelievable. I still don't understand it. I've known him for 25 years, I guess. But I've known him as a reporter for 15. I still have no idea. I still think there's something going on. If somebody came to me
he has
and
like
said,
a brilliant group of policy analysts in
if
India.
somebody came to he's like in deep cover, like, oh yeah, like we have
Jaipur.
Exactly. No, he doesn't do any of this stuff. There's a whole team of people who do it. They write it for him.
David Dayen isn't a person. It's a concept.
Right. And it was revealed there was some type of like experiment.
It's all a stock image photo.
Yeah, exactly. There's like 3 different people we interview whenever we have David Dayen on. We don't know which one it is, but they all do that voice.
It ends, in the horror movie, you're in some labyrinth and it's just like, hey, Sam, just did a new piece.
Right, there's 20 of them. Maybe he's cloned. I don't know. It's very strange.
Amazon's exploiting a loophole that was signed during the Clinton era.
There was a little bit of a hint during when I asked him how Thanksgiving was. He sort of answered as if someone who really didn't exist would answer.
Right.
He answered it like someone who had Thanksgiving with a bunch of identical David Dayens.
Exactly. Right. All my clones got along.
It was very reinforcing, Sam.
Right. Folks, this program exists because of your support. You can become a member today by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. But more importantly than joining the Majority Report today is look up. It's basically 3 steps. First one, I guess, is get on your computer. Second one is look up what committees your congressperson is on. Second and a half step is to see if they are on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Financial Services Committee, or the Appropriations Committee. If they're not on one of those 4 committees, call them. I guess there's 5 steps. Call them, tell them you want them to be on one of those committees. They can choose, be part of the deal that the Progressive Caucus has pushed. Obviously, they got to be a member of the Progressive Caucus. And then, once you've done that, write it up in an email, those 4 steps. I guess maybe we should be a little more clear on it. But and then send it to 4 of your friends. Have them do the exact same thing, although they won't have to look anything up. They could just call and say, I want you to be on one of these committees. And believe me, this will have a material impact. Such a small thing, and you could actually make this happen because they get no calls like this. And the idea of 4 people or 10 people or 5 people calling because they've read this article, let's say, or heard it on the Majority Report, and they're now keyed into it, this is what moves them. This is the algorithm. I mean, I even, in calling today as opposed to emailing has even more weight. I was an intern in 1986 on the Ways and Means Committee. Brian Donnelly sat on that committee when they were doing the omnibus. And like for every letter you would get or call, there was an algorithm, and it was worth like literally thousands of people in the district. All right. So, and then after you do that, then become a member of the Majority Report at jointhemajority.report.com. Also, reminder, we are now, what's the number, Brendan?
Number is, which one?
What number you think I'm talking about? Are there multiple numbers? How many how many people have bought tickets, or how many tickets are left? Like what percentage of tickets are left for the Brooklyn PodFest live Majority Report? It's on January 13th. Is that correct?
Dropping like a sack of potatoes. It is low.
Well, I don't know. I don't even know how to contextualize what you just said.
If you don't have a ticket, you got to buy a ticket.
Where are we at? 50% now?
Yeah.
Okay. So 50% sell out. We announced a week ago. It's happening quickly. So January 13th, 18 and over and $15. Get your ticket now because it's going to go away. And then all you'll be able to do is go to Michael's show in February. Now, if you do both,
you're having an amazing time.
They're going to be, maybe if we get enough people who do both, maybe we'll just do one in March and we'll just keep doing it every month.
It's actually probably
become
not
the Grateful Dead of podcasts.
It's probably not a bad idea to Grateful Dead it. Get your tickets February 1st, Bell House. Those are also, what did you say, a sack of potatoes? Sure.
Falling like a sack of potatoes.
Those are falling like a sack of potatoes, folks.
Hotcakes is maybe a better metaphor.
Hotcakes. Hot Latkes.
Really?
With Alona,
heavy.
Bhaskar, Sunkara, and Trevor Beaulieu. It's going to be a lot of fun. And, of course, David, Matt, and myself. Tomorrow on TMBS, Professor Richard Wolff is joining us in studio. For those who are close followers of TMBS, there could be some real fireworks between him and David Griscom. It could get a little ugly. And, of course, we're going to be talking about Brexit and what post-capitalism can actually look like. And there's going to be a little bit of a primer on Northern Ireland and the Brexit negotiations tomorrow, 7 o'clock on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel.
Matt.
Yeah, Literary Hangover still got the Hope Leslie episodes and the Pequot War stuff, which I went on to a friend of the show, Isha's podcast, Historically,
nice.
to talk about those episodes for Thanksgiving. Also, coming up in the next couple of weeks, me and my friend Chris are going to be talking about Democracy in Chains. I'm going to get into whether or not that's historical fiction, as a lot of libertarian economists saying, or am I going to decode some of the rhetorical sleights of hand they used to create that impression on Google?
I'm very excited to look
So
at
I'm
that.
doing a lot of research on this, so that's coming up.
I'm interested in finding that out.
Such a good book.
There's been a lot of controversy, and some people I respect think that there were some citations that were problematic.
Yeah, I think
not citations, but some leaps of logic around what's his face and whether he actually
Buchanan
was
in his
actually
heart,
exactly
that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So I do want to say I was on Ronald Reagan's podcast and I just want
really
to say that as an example to say everybody really should subscribe to that podcast, particularly with what's happening now. Like that is a legit everything you need to know on a policy legal level on immigration. We had a really fun time. We talked about Hillary's comments and broader politics around immigration in Europe and the United States, but his podcast is a weekly listen for me, so please go to Redirect.
I'm a bit behind, but it's not just Reagan. He's got at least one other guy.
Yeah, this guy Matthew Archambault, who is an immigration attorney in Philly, and they are both like in the thick of it, and they have a big network, and it's a really good show.
Folks, Calming Comfort by Sharper Image is the luxurious weighted blanket that mimics the soothing feeling of being hugged, so you can sleep better, feel great, and stress less. The Calming Comfort weighted blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free, stress-free, best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. And right now, just for our listeners, you can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com, use the promo code MAJORITY at checkout to receive 15% off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code MAJORITY, because you cannot put a price on a great night's sleep.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun hat.
Are you ready?
sent us this.
Alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt. Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them. Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what? Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy! I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here. I am a total pussy.
We are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen, of the Majority Report program. So a major climate report from 13 agencies was recently dropped. In fact, it was dropped on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, when everybody's paying attention to the news. Just a little bit of highlights here. I should tell you, 13 agencies, 13 federal agencies report. This is a congressionally mandated report. There has been 4 of them since 2000. The last one came in 2014. It's the National Climate Assessments publication, or I should say report. It is overseen by the U.S. Global Change Research Program. The report stretches over 1,000 pages. So my understanding is that conservatives will discount it because they want all reports under 10 pages. The authors argue, remember these are 13 federal agencies, that global warming is, quote, transforming where and how we live and presents growing challenges to human health and quality of life, the economy, and the natural systems that support us. They conclude humans must act aggressively to adapt to current impacts and mitigate future catastrophes, quote, to avoid substantial damages to the U.S. economy, environment, and human health and well-being over the coming decades. I don't know how much of this involves what we can expect internationally and the implications of what will happen internationally and what will happen to national security because of that, specifically in terms of what happens overseas. Hundreds of scientists and federal officials who spent months working on the detailed document were frustrated but not surprised that the administration chose to release it on the day after Thanksgiving. Several people involved in the report said its release originally had been planned for early December, but then the administration's officials decided on Black Friday. Here is Rick Santorum on CNN, just absolutely giddy at the notion that this dire report from 13 federal agencies was underreported.
President Trump appears to be at odds with his own administration over their new report warning about the effects of climate change. Did we mention that the administration released the report on Friday of a holiday weekend? Let's talk about that. Rick Santorum is nodding his head.
Good for them.
Good for them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, at least you guys are transparent about it.
Well, I mean, this is a report generated by people who are in the bureaucracy. These are not Trump appointees. I mean, this report's been generated for...
Meaning they're non-political.
Well, no, that I think the point that Donald Trump makes is true, which is, look, if there was no climate change, we'd have a lot of scientists looking for work. The reality is that a lot of these scientists are driven by the money that they receive. And of course, they don't receive money from corporations and Exxon and the like. Why? Because they're not allowed to, because it's tainted. But they can receive it from people who support their agenda. And that's what...
These are all federal agencies. They receive money from the government. But I love, this is the point that he's making, I guess, right? That Trump makes. It's continued. This is just stunning.
And that's what, and that I believe is what's really going on here. No one doubts that the climate is changing. No one doubts that. The question is, how much does man contribute? Number one, and number two, what can man do to actually change it? And those are the two big issues which we really don't talk about.
But that's all that people are talking about.
It's all Republicans.
That was a cool, though, every single part of the conversation is the second part.
Well, and the fact of the matter is that the reason why we don't hear people deny that the globe is warming is because it's not 6 years ago when all the Republicans completely denied it.
I think Inhofe is probably still denying it.
Inhofe is still saying it's a complete hoax, and so isn't Rush Limbaugh. In fact, frankly, so isn't the president when he tweets out that it's cold. So much for global warming.
Makes you think.
But I mean, it is pretty stunning, and it's also, I mean, I appreciate the fact that CNN. I mean, presumably they did a report on it, and they're looking for other ways to talk about the report, and this is one of them. That it's being completely subjugated by the Trump administration. I just don't know how Rick Santorum can look into the mirror. Well, I know how he does it. He just says that God wanted me to lie today on CNN, and I did, and I've done my job. And then he calls Foster Freeze and says, I did my job. Please send more money. Really...
if it's about money, people protesting at, for instance, his house like they did Tucker Carlson's would probably drive up his leverage when he goes to ask how much money he, should make for going on to continue to deny climate change.
And I love the idea that Rick Santorum thinks that there's just not enough science to be done out there. Scientists
they figured out all the important stuff, and now they're just messing around.
If climate change didn't exist, all these climate scientists wouldn't have anything to. They'd just be like reporting on the climate and saying, "I did research, and it's the same as it was yesterday."
There's no openings at the Weather Channel.
Well, like a fundamental misunderstanding.
They got to
what
keep this
scientists
up.
do.
You really think Rick Santorum
or
is
obfuscation?
A fundamental?
It's just impressive to me, like just the depth that people will sink with such a big smile on their face. Meanwhile, here is a AEI spokesperson, Danielle Pletka, and I'm trying to remember if I've ever been on MSNBC with her.
She's a dummy.
I don't remember but I do recall someone from AE. They seem to send out the sort of the thinnest gruel.
They're like foot soldiers.
When they send out their pundits, they're not sending their best.
That's right.
Like, you know, in Power Rangers, the foot soldiers. Anybody remember that?
No.
Oh, well, they were like the sort of like regular bad guy, but they were very easy to dispatch. There were just hundreds of them that the Power Rangers would just go through. Yeah.
Drones. Pawns, drones, fools.
Well,
stormtroopers.
Here is Danielle Pletka on Meet the Press on MSNBC talking about this major climate report. 13 agencies in the U.S. government, the fourth one they've ever put out in the past 18 years. Last one was in 2014. Says that we are facing dire consequences. We need to act on it quickly and resolutely. And here's the American Enterprise Institute.
Problem again is that I think there's a perception among those for whom Donald Trump speaks, and let's admit that Donald Trump does actually speak for some people, that
I think 46% is a number that seems to be the number for people wondering.
And that's a pretty substantial bunch of people. The problem for many is that they perceive this as an agenda that is much more about corporate and much more about law and much more about the kind of governance that America has and much less about climate. So from the standpoint of those who have doubts about this, and I don't think we can have any doubts that there is climate change, whether it's anthropogenic, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I look at this as a citizen and I see it.
I don't understand this talking point. I'm not a scientist, which means that I don't have to listen to the vast majority of scientists who have weighed in on this.
Yeah, that's a very ineffective talking point, right? Like, if you're like, how do you undermine the claims of a field by saying you're not part of the field?
I have to.
Unless
to
you're
fair,
trying to say that scientists are like analogous to, I don't know, like palm readers.
I went to an eye doctor with Saul to get his eyes checked out. I told the guy, look, I am not an eye doctor, so I'm not going to believe what you say. And Saul just squints his way through the day. Now, continue.
So I understand it. On the other hand, we need to also recognize that we just had two of the coldest years, the biggest drop in global temperatures that we've had since the 1980s, the biggest in the last 100 years. We don't talk about that because it's not part of the agenda. The United States has been dropping in CO2 emissions since we pulled out of Paris. There are actually good things that are happening. We are not using dirty coal anymore. It's the Europeans who are using dirty coal. There actually is some corporate leadership on this. Yes, we need to deal with these problems. Yes, we need to mitigate the things we see, but we shouldn't be hysterical.
You know, this lady is such an unmitigated liar, fabulist. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to listen to the overwhelming number of scientists in the world telling us that this is man-made problem and there are man-made solutions. However, I will pull out one fun fact that we've had extreme cold over the past 2 years that nobody talks about.
Yeah, that anybody who's taken a science elective could dispatch.
And on top of that, I'm also not going to mention the fact that the only reason why our CAFE standards and we're putting out less CO2 is a function of California basically saying we're not going to go along with what the federal government is saying. And if I am not mistaken, the federal government is attempting to sue California into lowering their emission standards. And all of the car companies don't want to do it because they don't want to go back and forth because they realize that we're headed to a disaster. And they know that anybody coming in who's reasonably sane in the leadership of our government is going to require them to cut back. So they figure, why don't we just do the obvious responsible thing?
She happens to be the vice president for foreign and defense policy for AEI.
So they couldn't get anybody else in that morning. We need to send somebody. Well, I guess I'll do it. I'm not a scientist, but.
I mean, that's particularly funny because the Pentagon is pretty far out ahead on this as well.
I'm not a Pentagon official, but
I'm not a Pentagon official, but I think that they should make absolutely unnecessary oil runs, which put their troops in unnecessary harm's way when there's an alternative. Why, you ask? Well, because I'm not politically correct.
I don't fly a bomber, but I do think that we could drop a couple on Iran. I mean, come on. Unbelievable.
It's just funny though, because it's like the reason we don't do anything is because of power,
right?
Because of these industries.
This is just a projection of that
governance, and this is the best they've got. I mean, maybe like several years ago, it was like, hey, let's fund some scientists to do some like alternative graphs that look really impressive. And now we could just put some idiot out on TV. It's just like, it's science. What do you do?
Well, the bottom line is they know that, look, we're just paying for this. Like we're paying for the lawmakers. We don't really have to spend too much time selling it to the public at this point.
That's why that woman who, when in the preamble to that clip, she's talking about the 46% or whatever people Trump represents that just need to be heard about their feelings about climate change, right? Like, which is a way to round up, because even Trump fans are like, there's more people who believe in climate change than like are anti-Trump, I think.
Right. I think it's like about 72%, I think, are people who say when they're polled that they accept that climate is changing because of human action.
Right.
Which is the simplest, bare minimum way it's polled.
So her taking Trump's highest approval ratings to say, like, all of these people also want to know, like, what's in it for me, this climate change.
This is also not dissimilar from Meg Whitman when she was is it Meg Whitman? She was the former EPA. Yep. I just recall some Saturday morning sitting next to her on one of those type of shows saying, well, part of the reason is that the liberal left is just so in your face about this that it forces the conservatives to say climate change is not real. Now, look, that woman on from the AIE on Meet the Press, obviously either not terribly bright or just assumes that the rest of us aren't. And it's probably the latter. She's probably smart enough to know what she's saying is all a bunch of lies and obfuscation.
Obfuscation.
Thank you. She's probably better at enunciating than I am. Nevertheless, she's full of weak gruel. So you're probably thinking like, who?
Excuse me, it's Christine Todd Whitman. Apologies.
Christine Todd Whitman. Yes, exactly. Meg Whitman ran in
California.
So we heard from the woman from AIE who was trying to sell us on the notion that she's not a scientist, so she can't possibly say what causes global warming. She's enough of a scientist to concede now that there is global warming. I don't know where she heard that from, probably scientists, but she's not enough of a scientist to agree with the scientists that it is a function of what humanity is doing to our planet. And she's not enough of a scientist to accept that scientists are saying there are certain things that we can do to impact global climate change. So she's probably pretending to be somewhat dim on this. Which leads us to the next question. Is Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, pretending to be so dim on this? Here he is on Meet the Press making, well, I don't know, what kind of argument about global climate change.
On us. Final question. I'm curious your reaction to the climate report. This is from the federal government. Congress, you guys ordered the federal government to do this. And let me read you one of the conclusions. With continued growth in emissions at historic rates, annual losses in some economic sectors are projected to reach hundreds of billions of dollars by the end of the century, more than the current gross domestic product of many U.S. states. Essentially, this document isn't just painting a picture of an environmental catastrophe that's coming, but an economic catastrophe. What are you going to do about it in the U.S. Congress, Senator?
Well, first of all, I look forward to digging into the report and listening to what other experts on the outside have to say about it. I think it's important anytime we take a report like that to examine what public policies they might have in mind, what public policies that could be brought forward that would address the problem they're addressing without simultaneously devastating the U.S. economy. There's no question that for a variety of reasons, and regardless of where one stands on the issue of climate change, that the burning of fossil fuels does emit into the environment a number of things that aren't the healthiest.
Should we put a price on carbon? Are you open to a carbon tax? Are you open to a carbon tax?
No, I'm not. All the proposals I've seen so far that would address any of these issues would devastate the U.S. economy and have little or no benefit that is demonstrable from our standpoint. And so I have yet to see a proposal that would bring this about. I think if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, that's got to be done through innovation. And innovation can be choked out through excessive government regulation. We can't let that happen.
All right, Senator Mike Lee.
So the U.S. government is choking the innovation to come up with alternative energy sources, like maybe what are they giving? Too many loans to solar companies? There's a guy who seemingly completely unprepared to answer that question. Couldn't even come up with his own talking points about that. Pretty stunning.
I think especially when we talk about energy, it's great to remind ourselves that there's nothing innately positive about innovation, right? Like a company like Exxon is incredibly innovative at finding new ways of getting to further sort of like harder and harder to reach oil deposits, as an example. Like
part of that is
innovation.
And part of that is also just the cost of oil going up. So
but
as the price of oil goes up, a lot of things become much more viable.
Well, that's true.
But yes, they're
I'm
innovative.
saying literally in the way that people use these terms as like some innate positive process of like scientifically minded, capable people finding new ways to do things that are difficult. That doesn't mean that's translated to more efficient energy or getting us off of oil. It doesn't mean anything.
Well, yeah, I don't think Mike Lee is interested in getting us off oil anyway.
Of course not.
I mean, I think broadly speaking,
No, Mike Lee's super concerned.
Yeah.
He's very concerned.
He's ready to dig into that report.
Yeah, he's ready to dig into that
Can't
report.
wait to dig into this.
It was
baby.
funny before he got to his full spin, like midway through that interview, it almost was the like college didn't do your work presentation. We're just like, and with that concluded, I will be happy to take your questions.
He was totally like, that is definitely a report. And it was clearly put out by the federal government.
And so concludes.
And I'm not just going to read that report. I'm going to get some other reports of my own, just so I have a full holistic view.
I want to really take this in both sky level, but also in the details. And thank you.
Reports are super important, which is why you will see them reported. So I've looked at that.
Those interagency.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. Welcome to the program, John.
Okay. Tomorrow, Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance, will be released. Also, next Monday, Bernie will hold a national town hall on December 3rd aimed at addressing the global threat of climate change and exploring solutions that can protect the planet from devastation and create tens of millions of good-paying jobs. Sanders will be joined by 350 organizer and author Bill McGibbon, activist and Our Revolution board member Shailene Woodley, CNN host and author Van Jones, and other environmental experts and activists. He also released an op-ed on Wednesday called Democrats Need a Bold Agenda. Here's what we should do in the first 100 days of Congress, where he lists several things: increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour and indexing it to a medium wage growth hereafter, a path to Medicare for all, bold action to combat climate change, fixing our broken criminal justice system, comprehensive immigration reform, progressive tax reform, a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, lowering the price of prescription drugs, making public colleges and universities tuition and substantially reducing student debt, and expanding Social Security. And he ends it with this paragraph. This is the bottom line. Instead of us having a Congress that listens to wealthy campaign contributors, it is time we had a Congress fighting to create an economy and a government that works for us all, not just for those at the top. He did receive a little bit of criticism for not having a voting rights agenda. Do you think that should be added to his platform? And I'd also like to talk about Digby's take on pay-go and the new taxes on the bottom 80% unless there's a supermajority. And also talk a little bit about the problem solvers.
All right, John, John, hold on for a second. I'll answer you the first question very quickly so you can go on with those comments. Yes, he should add that. That should be, I still contend that's the first thing the Democrats should do. The Democrats, when they get into a position of power, need to pass bills that will help them retain power. And also are obviously the just things to do. They should make every Republican vote against a new voting rights formula for Section 5. They should also make it easier to vote, without a doubt. Start there, and I think you should add that. But what did you want to say about Digby's comments?
Yeah, I've been reading Digby for about 14 years. I enjoy her writing and in your interviews with her, but her take on pay-go and taxing the 80%, unless there's a supermajority, I just don't understand it. She said, here's what she was saying. She says, I keep having a feeling that there's more to this story that we don't know. And then a couple of minutes later, she said, she says it doesn't matter because nothing will pass anyway. But it does matter to millions of progressives. If a progressive president is elected in 2020, the Democrats win the Senate back, then Pelosi, says pay-go without, has pay-go, and then we'll have no new taxes on the bottom 80% without a supermajority already in place. I mean, it'll just be devastating. And Pelosi has already did this. I mean, she already passed pay-go in 2007 as a rule, and then there was a law in 2010 that was signed by Obama that enforced that also. So, I mean, this is nothing new from her. And, yeah, I just think this whole idea that, Pelosi, I've been following her for many decades, just like you have, and she has a good, progressive voting record, but I think she's been corrupted by the system, and there's no reason why we should have this, and there's not enough pushback on this.
Listen, I agree. I think the only thing I could say that Digby, the implication is that in the event of 2020, there being a Senate and House controlled by Democrats, that can be reversed. Now, I am with you that there's a certain amount of inertia that's created by passing these things. And so I am a little bit more alarmed about it than you are. The sequester, in my mind, was a bit of a disaster, at the very least from a narrative standpoint, but also degraded a lot of agencies, I think. And that's what you're talking about in 2010. And the only thing that I can imagine that Digby thinks might be going on is that Pelosi needs this type of thing to maintain her leadership. I mean, I think it's less about her being corrupted and more about her doing what she needs to do to maintain her her speakership in this instance, her leadership. It's now a speakership, and the only outside chance, it seems to me, of reversing this thing is if there is a more progressive, if the progressive caucus gets even larger in 2020, and the next leader is theoretically their base of support comes from that larger progressive caucus. That's the only thing I can tell you. But I agree with you. I think it's problematic. The other problem is we don't have a better option. But I think also Digby is reacting to the idea that the Progressive Caucus doesn't seem to be so up in arms about it. So maybe there is, but I don't know. I'm going to dig around, but I appreciate the call, John. Good jump.
All right.
Thanks,
all right. Thank you.
Let's see what we got here. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this?
Sam, it's Ronald Reagan.
I had a feeling. Ronald Reagan. How was your Thanksgiving?
Wow. What a way to start the fun half.
What do you mean? Climate change?
Well,
you don't find that fun?
Back-to-back fun half powerhouses. I can't talk today. That's all I'm saying. I had a funny experience at Thanksgiving, actually. I was playing the Ask the Moms clip to my nephew, who I'm slowly converting to your show, by the way.
Okay.
He's got a very conservative father, so.
Ooh, all right. Well, it'll take some time. I imagine you've got a couple of those in your family, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I was playing him the clip, the interview that Kavanaugh did, and my sister, who doesn't follow politics at all, kind of heard Brett Kavanaugh speaking, and she goes, "Is that guy drunk? What are you listening to?" She had no context, had no idea who he was. And then my mom goes, "Yeah, it sounds like he's having a stroke. What are you guys watching?" And then I explained, no, he's a Supreme Court justice. But that interview is actually, yeah, that whole interview is pretty incredible to revisit. I wanted to say the whole Rick Santorum, nobody's questioning climate change thing. It reminds me of a subtle shift that happened in the LGBT rights debate when people finally stopped arguing that gay people aren't born that way, which seems like really obvious, and it's kind of funny to think that debate ever even happened. But I grew up, being taught that, and I know a lot of people were taught that for a long time, that it was just a perversion or a learned behavior. And there was this subtle shift that happened even amongst most sort of evangelical types several years ago, when they finally came around to admitting, okay, it turns out maybe they are born that way.
This was around, I feel it was around 2007, 8, 9, 10, somewhere around there. You started to see. Because people forget,
that's right.
As late as 2004, I think it was, maybe 2003, George Bush got on national television, prime time, from the Oval Office and said, with a heavy heart, I must promote a constitutional amendment to say that gay people can't get married. And I mean, this was a primary driver of a lot of that evangelical vote in 2004. It was their version of, the Supreme Court vacancy. There was a lot of referendum, and that was a strategy by Rove. And then it just seemed when there were bigger problems, I don't know, maybe the financial crisis, people were like, I just don't have the energy to pretend that gay people aren't people anymore. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah. So it's a small shift, but I think it's important. So that's those clips are ridiculous, but it's also good to hear. Even the fact that Chuck Todd would ask somebody, what are you going to do about climate change, is a step in the right direction. I wanted to talk real quick about the border and sort of what we're seeing down there. It's, earlier this year, all of a sudden, right-wing people, the local AM talk radio, these two meatheads that don't know anything, they were saying things like, of course you apply for asylum at the port of entry. Everyone knows that. We have no choice but to prosecute these people who are entering illegally. And suddenly this thing that nobody knew or cared about became, common knowledge, I guess, this idea that the place to apply for asylum is at the port of entry. Now, if you're caught entering illegally, you can still apply for asylum, but this sort of got injected into, mainstream thinking. And so what did these people do? Well, they go to a port of entry, and now we're being told that that's also not the way to do it. I think a couple days ago, the port at San Ysidro had conducted something like 20 asylum interviews. And this is a problem that's been building up now for years, not just recently, but in Tijuana specifically. They've outsourced a kind of lottery system to the Mexican government so that only a limited number of people can be interviewed per day. And so there were already people from all over the world camping out in Tijuana waiting for their turn when the caravan arrived. And this whole thing reminds me of.
Let me just wait. I want to just highlight that point. people come from all around the world, fly in to Mexico, and then presuming that they're going to get an opportunity to be interviewed for asylum. Maybe they come from an African country with, famine or, whatever, or they come from Syria, or and they attempt to go into a port of entry there because there's only two countries. I'm not sure if people knew this. There's only two countries that actually abut the United States physically. And you probably know this because you're an immigration attorney, but it's Mexico and Canada. People may not realize this. Mexico, less expensive than Canada. So if you were going to go to, if you wanted to apply for asylum legally, what you would need to do is to go to one of those two countries and wait in line, essentially, to get asylum. You would go to the less expensive of the countries because you would save money. If you were, let's say, poor and coming from a place where, all of your ownings were destroyed in a natural disaster or a war, or the government had decided to take all of your stuff because they were politically oppressing you. And so you have people there from all around the world who come in and they spend what little money they have left waiting for an interview. Right? I mean, how many of those people do you think there are?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's thousands of people like that in Tijuana, which is obviously a real stress on their local, everything, right? Their economy and everything else. And what we've done, like I said, is outsource a kind of lottery system to the Mexican government to allow a certain number of interviews per day. The crazy thing is, this has been happening forever. I mean, it's not anything unusual, and this is, the most politicized thing I've ever seen in my life. And we're told, we can't even discuss, gun control after a school shooting because that's politicizing something. This is taking something that's been happening for years and years and years, and the whole, sending the troops and shutting down the ports of entry. I've got a friend, she's an attorney. She runs a nonprofit in Tijuana, and she's there now, and she doesn't know if she'll be able to come back. She has court tomorrow. All of this is pure theatrics, and we have the capacity as a country to put into place the infrastructure we need to make sure that people get their interviews, and if they qualify, great, and if not, they'll be sent back. But everybody's community is full of people who have either been granted asylum or who came this way and they're waiting for their hearings. And you're surrounded by those people, and you don't realize it because they're just living their lives normally, and not
or they're sleeper cells,
anything.
Is what you're saying.
Right. They could be, coming here to have terror babies. We don't know, but that's their long game, obviously.
Did you have that MS-13 audio of them being like, Ronald Reagan's our most effective lawyer?
That's the ad I run locally. It's in Spanish.
We have sleeper cells across the Pacific Northwest, and he calls in to talk to Sam and say that we're doing nothing.
I mean, I think what's happening, though, is not unlike the dynamic that John Sides, and I'm just saying this from just sheer speculation, but that the dynamic where Donald Trump got left or liberal people who are liberal on race that much more liberal, or even people who are moderate on race that much more liberal in response. I think there is a growing awareness of immigration as an issue. The interesting thing is that there's becoming, and there needs to be, because I don't think there is a cohesive position on immigration in this country on the left. To the extent that I'm not aware of cohesion, and it ranges from no borders to, I guess, the center center-left, saying some type of guest worker program, which seems to me maybe is really more accurately described as center-right. But let me ask you this: what would you say should be if you were in charge of the left, Ronald Reagan? What would be the immigration policy that you would promote? What would be the principles of that policy?
Yeah, so I think that you have to have a broad, aggressive amnesty. People are undocumented because the laws are broken and ill-conceived, and so they need to be changed.
All right, so amnesty,
that means
that to me is low-hanging fruit. Amnesty for people who are here without documentation, get them into the system, make them citizens. What do you do going forward?
Well, I think that you need to make it easier for people to come here to work if they want to, which means having more visas available to the industries that need foreign workers. And I think you also have
Unlimited?
to couple it with well, I think it needs to match labor demand somehow. I don't know about
so unlimited,
but
right? I mean, how do you measure that?
Yeah.
How do you measure that? I mean, so unlimited, and those visas got to be you're fully documented. So theoretically, you could belong to a union, and people could be protected in some respect. Yes.
Yeah, I think you have to match it with certain really strong labor protections. I have actually another one of those family members that you hypothesized might exist earlier tell me that there's no such thing as a labor shortage. There's just employers who aren't willing to pay to get the job done right, which is like, he's really conservative, but it was like a small glimmer of wokeness. It's true that a lot of the undocumented labor force exists because of exploitation, and I think you could quell or sort of satisfy some of the concerns that people have with the depression of wages and so forth by coupling immigration reform with a higher minimum wage or guaranteed benefits or things like that, so that the American worker doesn't feel like he's being displaced by a new aggressive worker visa program. And so, some of that has to happen too. And, the problem is the left doesn't really want to admit that that's a problem. And so, yeah, I don't know. It does get complicated, but I just think, and there's also just two
So
or
who
three
should be
little
allowed
things
to
that-
become a citizen? Who should be allowed to become a citizen?
Well, the rule right now is you have to be a permanent resident for 5 years. You have to speak English. You have to, not be deportable and be deserving of a discretionary grant of naturalization. I don't know that needs to change. The question would be who gets to become a permanent resident. And so that's where you would have to implement, like I said, an amnesty to allow people who are either undocumented or there are people who've been on TPS now for like 20 years, and they're about to go back to being completely and wholly undocumented. And so you have to have a program.
But I've already granted a total amnesty. Everybody who's in the country, you have a path to citizenship. You're all legal now, and you're under protection. It's just going forward is the question.
Yeah, I think there used to be for a while a program called Registry where you could basically, and I think they have this actually in Europe too, where you can just show that you've been here for a certain amount of time, subject yourself to a background check, show that you paid your taxes, and you can earn your permanent residency. It's not.
But what do you do if you
giveaway.
show up at the border? Do we let everybody in?
Well, I don't think that. I don't know. Honestly, that's complicated. I tend to be.
You know what he's afraid of?
Open borders.
He's afraid of losing his work as an immigration attorney. Open borders means you don't get the work, right?
You better.
It's classic.
No,
it's classic.
That's not true.
It's classic.
Oh God.
Just like one of those
I'm
climate
looking out for
change
numero
scientists.
I'm looking out for numero uno over here, but
There you
no.
go, yeah.
I tend to be for open borders, but it does get complicated. But at the same time, I do think that it's a lot of the things that we're afraid of happening won't happen. I've got a lot of clients who would love to go back and spend their winters in Mexico, but their laws keep them trapped here. And having more open borders, maybe not completely open, but having a lot more flexibility in allowing people to come and go is better, because we know that freedom is the goal, and freedom and liberty are awesome. And
as long as you get paid, right? So you're not saying total open borders, as long as you have proper documentation that, let's say, an immigration attorney could write up for you.
No, so
mass sales.
After the amnesty, I want an immigration lawyer bailout.
There you go.
And then I'll go retire somewhere. But
he's got it all planned out.
Yeah.
Typical. All right, Ronald Reagan. Appreciate the call. I'm with you on this.
Alrighty.
I appreciate the call. I'm with you. I don't. You can have what you can have what, open borders, it could mean a lot of different things.
I think that we should be looking at some type of, if Canada, or excuse me, if NAFTA was a political project, not just the corporate project, or if things like
NAFTA, you want the superhighway.
I do. Yeah. Or Mercer, the Association of Latin American States. The Caribbean. I think there's no reason why you couldn't think of an America's wide, somewhat EU analogous. I think that would be great.
That would certainly make things easier. That's not open borders per se.
No,
it's more like just free passage.
Free passage, demilitarized, and you.
Anybody
who's gone to a Schengen country, knows it is. Significantly easier and more humane, even for like the easiest travel possible, which is literally, just flying to another country to go spend a couple weeks there. It's night and day, even for that.
Calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey there. This is Kentucky Fried Comrade. I'm calling from California.
Kentucky Fried Comrade from California. What's on your mind?
Two points. First, I actually bought my first podcast-related merchandise recently. It was from a little podcast called Redirect.
Redirect.
And I'm just saying.
I know.
I'm just saying,
Gotta
Sam.
get some shirts going. I know.
Michael, you got to get on that.
Brendan's working on it.
Indeed.
What else you got?
The other thing. You were playing a clip earlier. It was the guy who looks like a thumb in a suit talking about like how, it's not all women and children at the border. It's males or men or whatever.
Tom Homan.
It kind of thumb in a suit guy.
Yep.
It reminded me. I know Michael had ContraPoints on, I think last week or maybe the week before. She did a video a year or two back where she was discussing the nature of the alt-right ideology and specifically anti-Semitism and how it bleeds into all these different other forms of bigotry and racism and sexism and all that. And one of the big points she was making in the video essay she was doing was how there's this huge concern among the alt-right about essentially brown people being paid by Jews to come to America to steal white women or corrupt white women. And every time I hear some in a suit guy saying, oh, these aren't just women and children, it's actually men, and it's older military age men or whatever, however he framed it, coming across the border, it harkens back to that point to me, that a lot of this concern is really like it's bleeding into that right wing and kind of fascistic mentality that like they're coming to steal our women. And I think that's
what did Donald Trump launch his campaign with?
Yeah,
what did Donald Trump
exactly.
launch his campaign with? I mean that is of course that is age old. That is why so many black men were hung. Particularly post Reconstruction, probably during Reconstruction too, on some level. But that is the classic. That is a very durable fear on the right. That these, I mean, it's not like...
Anyway, love the show, guys.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Love the show, despite the fact there's no merch. Speaking of immigrants to this country and the alt-right and right-wing bigots and those who deny they're right-wing bigots, I give you Gavin McInnes, who has decided... Now, this is complicated, okay? He did 30-minute video on this, and we've watched it forensically, and we still can't understand exactly what his point is. But he is claiming that he is stepping down from the leadership of the group he founded, Proud Boys. But then he's also saying, I'm not actually stepping down because I've never been a leader of this group. I just founded it. It's been a leaderless group. But I am stepping down as its non-leader, stepping away because supposedly this is going to have legal implications for some of the members of this group who are arrested for being violent by the New York Police Department, this known bastion of liberal apologists who always round up people who don't commit violence because they're such SJWs on the New York Police Department. So this gets a little bit convoluted. He also argues this is not any type of organization for real. It's just like it was just a joke. But of course, somehow they all seem to move in unison in some, and there's 10,000 of them in on this joke, according to him, too. It's a little bit convoluted, but here's the way he opened up his video as he announced that he was stepping away from the group because he's lost all his friends and his wife is pressuring. No, wait a second. That's not what he said publicly. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As of today, November 21st, 2018, I'm officially disassociating myself from the Proud Boys. In all capacities, forever, I quit. I was told to use the term stepping down, but I refused because that makes no sense. I was never the leader, only the founder. Although the media will likely say Gavin McInnes steps down as leader of extremist hate group Proud Boys, because that's how they roll. I do all of this reluctantly, because I still see it as the greatest fraternal organization in the world, but rumors and lies and terrible journalism has made its way to the court system. And the NYC 9, the Proud Boys arrested after I did a talk here in New York on October 12th, are facing serious charges. I'm told by my legal team and law enforcement that this gesture could help alleviate their sentencing. Fine. At the very least, this will show jurors they are not dealing with a gang and there's no head of operations. We are not an extremist group, and we do not have ties with white nationalists. That's a sentence that was pulled out of a Vancouver police report that, and not one reporter talking about this ever spoke to the FBI. Not one reporter. It's in a police report in Vancouver. It's an FBI dictum. We disavow all forms of alt-right, white supremacy, white nationalism, etc., etc. We are a multiracial club with blacks, Jews, gays, Asians, etc. And one thing I want to get into later is this whole idea.
Pause it for 1 second. You know, gays, they're one of those other races that are multiracial.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro was talking about that last week.
Oh, right. That's right. I forgot. The gays. They're one of the races. Is there more?
Supremacy, white nationalism, etc., etc. We are a multiracial club with blacks, Jews, gays, Asians, etc. And one thing I want to get into later is this whole idea of white nationalism and white supremacy is a crock. Why are we talking about it so much? Such people don't exist.
I don't want to be glib about this. Heather Heyer's dad, because a white supremacist ran her over with his car in the wake of her counter-protesting what was going on in Charlottesville. I mean, I don't know. Try and think, like, what does he actually believe? He doesn't believe that white nationalism or white supremacy exists? I mean, this is a little bit of a giveaway, isn't it? Right? Obviously, if it doesn't exist, we can't be one. We couldn't possibly be a white nationalist group. because it doesn't exist. And no white nationalist, no, like, in the history of the world, you've never heard about oppressed people sometimes being part of the oppressors. That never happens. Racists like Jesse Helms, for instance, right? Or is it Strom Thurmond or Jesse Helms? Both. They never had any relations with, let's say, black women or sired a black child, let's say. Right? A racist would never do that.
No, never happened.
I mean, this is absurd. These defenses are absurd. It is the year 2018. This is just, it's absurd. You had slave owners who had house slaves that they considered friends, family. I can't possibly be racist. I've lain with a black woman. How could I be racist? I mean, this is an absurd defense. But
it would be embarrassing if it wasn't so funny.
Now look, in this clip coming up later in his opus, Gavin McInnes admits that he started this group. He had, a healthy amount of racism in him, but he figured a way. I need to monetize it. I need to become extreme as a way of making money. I believe this enough to lose my friends. My wife is upset about it. She won't really do anything about it ultimately, but we have become socially completely isolated. We live in a ritzy part of New York and Westchester County, but unfortunately, it's not the white supremacist part. And so our neighbors are uncomfortable with someone who's associated with that. So I've really got to quit this group because I'm on a watch list now. And oh wait, no, I'm sorry, that's not what he says. That I don't know where I got that idea from. What he does go on to say is something that is completely incoherent about white supremacists can't exist because you'd never meet them at a dinner party.
Sorry this is so long, but I got a lot to get off my chest. I'm not a white nationalist, and Proud Boys are not white nationalists, obviously, but I would go farther than that. White nationalism is not a thing. They are not emboldened by Trump and coming out of the shadows. Stop it with these idiotic tropes. We do not have a white supremacist in the White House. That belief system is remarkably esoteric. It's unlikely any of us will ever meet a white supremacist.
Pause it. The delusion that is here is maybe a function of what alcohol can do to a brain over time. Or it could just be complete ignorance. You know who meets a lot of white supremacists? Non-white people. It doesn't come up amongst white to whites all the time. Particularly if you are, in Larchmont. Although maybe it does. I don't know. Maybe he's just lying too. Maybe he's unaware that I have just coincidentally a story about the right-wing violence on a rise in U.S., the number of hate groups on a rise in the U.S., reports of hate crimes in a rise in the U.S. Maybe it's just all imaginary.
All hoax.
Or is it irony?
Or maybe it's just all ironic. It's just a lot of people who just started a joke. And
a lot of people provocative.
You get these minorities to catch up to these jokes.
But here is his data point. Here's his data point. In addition to speaking to a lot of people who want to believe there are no white nationalists, theoretically, here is his data point as to how we know there are virtually no white supremacists, white nationalists. And he's not using the more nuanced term of white supremacy, I can tell you. He's using the term, that is like more like, I guess, Charlottesville people or just that guy who was sitting on the supervisor's board that we talked about the other day, and where was it, in Kansas, who said I'm not a member of the master race. You got a gap in your tooth, he says to the consultant to the city. the black woman who was just giving a report on, what was it, urban development in the city, or where the street sign should go. Well, you got a gap.
Development.
Nah, there's no white supremacy.
Urban development.
Urban development. Yeah, I would
think about it.
White supremacist. Yet the death threats keep coming. You got any of those? They're often from women. Just keep scrolling. I don't condone violence,
does that
but I
mean,
will be
though?
looking the other way if someone breaks my nose. That's nice. What if I'm with my kids? Oh, $500 to hit me upside the head with a baseball bat. That could be fatal. What else do we got here? White supremacist with a gun is a liberal with a gun. Okay, shoot me. I'll put 8 grams of lead in McInnes, and you wouldn't shed a tear. Based on a myth.
Yeah, I think, is that a listener?
Here's an example I like to use, and bear with me for a second here. You're at a dinner party. Everyone is new to each other at this dinner party, okay? And we're talking about ourselves. We're getting to know each other. They can be pretty unusual, and everyone goes, yeah, that's kind of a thing I could see. First guy, hi, I'm gay. Oh, but I'm married to 2 men. And you go, okay. Is that even legal? I never heard of that before. That person's fine. Next person, I'm a raw foodist, and I think the fact that you guys are eating cooked food is going to kill you. Jen, come on, you can't really believe that. Show me the science there. The next person says, oh, hi, I'm a flat earther, and I think there's no evidence that the earth is spherical. And you go, oh, gee, I've heard about you guys. I didn't know you actually existed. What about the moon? It looks pretty round. And then the 4th guy, I don't know what number at now, goes, hi, I'm a white nationalist. I hate Jews, and I want all blacks to go back to Africa. Everyone at the table would poop their pants. And the cutlery would drop. They'd either all leave or he'd have to leave. I don't think they could continue the dinner. That kind of belief system is not mainstream. And by the way, I know someone's going to just take that one little clip and then put it out there as proof. That's what always happens to me.
All right. Now, I know a lot of you are feeling like this is incomprehensible. What he's saying is incoherent.
Dinner party before?
This guy is, now maybe some of you are saying like, dinner party, cutlery? What is he talking about? Really? Do you really think that the dinner party in parts of this country where a man could say, I'm gay and I'm married to 2 men, people would just slough it off on some level? But putting all that aside, the idea that there aren't dinner parties where people don't people don't introduce themselves as white nationalists. White nationalists tend to believe that like, they doesn't even exist. The idea that they wouldn't say something that was prejudiced is beyond belief. Everyone has heard other people. I am pretty well known as a fairly liberal person. And I hear comments. I've actually been on trains with people saying, I've had people who have said to me, a guy who I was talking to about building a shed at one point, he said, you're a Jew, you've got a lot of money. Not even thinking that it was like offensive. I've been on a train with people who didn't know I was Jewish, who just said like, that's where all the Jews are. This is just not even at a dinner party. This is just like, oh, we have a passing.
There wasn't even any cutlery to put down. Shock.
I remember a woman at school who literally thought I had horns because I was the first Jew she had met. Now, I guess it's conceivable that Now, granted,
I have to say, if I met
all
that
the way
person,
back,
I would be like,
all the way back.
Can you
she was
come
from West
to
Virginia.
dinner more? I want to hear more of this.
She was from West Virginia. It was the 1980s, so it was a long time ago. But the idea, like, I don't know if he actually believes this stuff, or he just lives in such rarefied circles, or what. But
no, I think it's a combination of that, and then that he's obviously.
But I mean,
disingenuously cutting such an incredibly narrow lane that by the definition he's providing, nothing's going to fall into it.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
isn't
like
that kind of right?
Basically,
I mean,
white nationalists don't exist if they don't immediately try to recruit upon meeting a whole bunch of new mixed company at a dinner party.
I noticed you're bad. You not wearing a name tag that says white nationalist.
How about can we do a thought experiment where like maybe you're a white nationalist. You see another guy like sort of defend Trump a little bit. You pull him later to the side, and then you start talking about the whole white nationalism.
You don't have to do a thought experiment. They say this themselves.
Right.
If you read any profile of how these groups operate. Also, I mean, he does have his foot in both worlds because he's associated with white nationalism and so on. But then he's also does the old school Republican, like, you know, here's my black friend that likes Trump.
Right, of course.
And that's another thing, which is like, if you have a black friend, you can't harbor prejudiced attitudes. He's just cutting the most narrow lane on earth.
Because black people are genetically immune to racism.
Right. I mean, it's just, you know, we know what he's doing. It's not that complicated.
Fuck you forever. That's my common quote I say. It's fuck you forever. We're done.
There you go. So
Nelson Mandela's
what's going to be interesting with Gavin is if anybody pays any attention to him, he's obviously going to try and lay low now to hopefully get back some of his mojo in the hipster set. I think it's unlikely that's going to happen. But without him being an extremist, he really doesn't have much to offer because it's not like the guy is hugely funny. Now, look, I happen to know some of Gavin's friends, and one of the things, former friends, I should say, and one of the things they said, he desperately wants to be a comedian. He's always wanted to be a comedian. He hung out with a bunch of comedians. That's how I met him, a group of comedians. But he's just not funny. And after a while, if it doesn't work, what do? You develop a shtick that sells. And here's what's problematic about it. It doesn't matter what Gavin McInnes believes in his heart, what he's able to articulate from his now, drug or alcohol-riddled brain. It doesn't matter. What matters is what he does, what he puts out in public. And part of the problem is that people give him a pass in certain circles that I think are a problem. Do we get into his Rogan's comments on Antifa as well in this? No. Oh, we should. Can we let it play? No, I don't have that. All right. Well, let's play that different time then. We'll do that tomorrow, maybe.
I, Nelson Mandela, stepped down from the ANC, which is ridiculous. It wasn't even an organization to begin with. It was a contest at Walter Sulu. Oliver Tambo and I had to see who could go the longest without jerking off into the bush. It is really a fraternal organization about not jerking off and drinking South African beer. But the left and other politically correct agents have totally twisted what we're doing.
And it wasn't just black
It wasn't just black. Ronnie Cosros is a Jew. No one gives him any credit for that. But he's a self-hating Jew. How can we protest apartheid when it doesn't exist? It's a figment of your imagination.
Everybody says apartheid. Where'd
Where's
that come from?
apartheid? If you said, I practice apartheid at a dinner party, everyone would put down the cutlery.
I'm just doing this to help those in prison.
I have been told by my attorneys that the Robben Islanders can get a reduced sentence. I would do anything for those guys, including blow a guy at a truck stop.
Do you think that the members of the Proud Boys, now I know they're not a real group, but they are just a fraternal order.
The ANC is not a real group. That's correct.
They're just a fraternal order. Do you think that they sit there and they go, Gavin's really doing it for us, as opposed to like trying to get a show on You know, on
that'd be a question I'd be asking.
What was that? What's that
Spike
men's
TV?
Yeah, Spike.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's
exactly.
exactly
Spike TV
well,
Fuse or whatever.
That was my tweet, right? When that first happened, I was just like, "Oh, looks like somebody still thinks he can get a reality show."
Right, exactly.
Frowny face. No,
TV producers on the one hand, Proud Boys on the other.
What did you guys? Did any of you guys see I, Tanya? Did you see the movie The Tanya Hart? That's a great movie.
Yeah.
And the guy who is her boyfriend's or her husband's friends, who lives with his parents but claims that he's like
a security
security specialist, is like a prototype for all of these people that we're dealing with. He's the precursor of incels, Proud Boys, alt-right, Trump. So I have to think that guy's taking Gavin's word for it.
Right. Gavin's really falling on his sword.
Gavin's really doing it, but it sucks for him because he can't hang out with us.
Can't hang out, but he's going to be in. You know what? There's going to be. It's a bunch of like QAnon style conspiracy theories, like, flatulence maker on the Reddit thread is actually Gavin, or on Gab.com or whatever it is that
You know what's sad about Gavin, though, is that flatulence maker on Reddit might actually really be Gavin.
Yeah, it's true.
I think you guys might be optimistic because at least when I first saw this video, I looked at the comments and people were like, "This is lame." Like, here's a.
No, that's not optimistic. That's maybe they're doing better than we're giving them.
Well,
credit for.
that's what I'm saying. It's too optimistic for his bottom line.
All right, let's put up the comments. Let's do this segment. We'll call this segment "Do the Proud Boys Believe Gavin McInnes is doing this for their benefit?"
I have been told it will help the Robben Islanders.
Here we go. We've got our special segment. Gavin leaves the Proud Boys video. Let's look at this. There's 9,000 comments.
Look at the top comment.
Sargon of Akkad. The Proud Boys did nothing wrong. He comes in. Backroad Biker Adventures. The man denounces the alt-right. So who cares what he thinks or has to say? Why am I not surprised that the intellectually dishonest media has once again succeeded in destroying another conservative organization? Connor Anderson, Antifa, beats and stabs innocent people for no reason for 3 years and nothing happens. Proud Boys get jumped by Antifa and defend themselves for 30 seconds and attacked. We missed a part in this where Gavin says, Proud Boys never show up at Antifa rallies and protest them. Antifa doesn't have rallies because all they're doing is fighting against fascists like yourself.
We should do an official MR Antifa rally.
Don't show up. Don't bother us. It's free speech, motherfucker.
You can't appease a mob, my friend.
Beer-based dwarf. Controlled opposition is controlled. Well done.
Ooh.
Yeah, you can
thank. Oh, I like this one.
Thomas Salazar, you can thank Joe Rogan for some of this backlash too. He could have backed you up. What a puss. He criticized your outfit on another interview behind your back. Turns out he's just a stupid pothead. No Creative 22, extremist group My Foot. The Proud Boys are just doing what some of us, some cops are afraid to do because of fearing for their jobs. Proud Boys were just protecting people who can't fend for themselves. That's not extremist. Tom, nothing against pot. Joe just can't stand it when people think it makes him smarter. Bovis, Proud Boys still live on. Gavin is saving 9 good men from unfounded political prosecution. So they believe
that's
it.
the I, Tanya guy right there.
So wait, so who's saying that this is not... who's saying, never apologize, never surrender. If you do, they win. Clearly, everything the left says is a lie.
That was a common sentiment.
People believe it, Ashley Marie. I hate this. I hate you've been bullied into stepping down. They're not going to go easy on them because you step down. I feel like you stepping down is going to make it worse. This is really bad. Proud Boys, not Proud Soys.
Nice.
No one seems to notice that. There's 9,000 comments,
a fucking
but
soy
no,
boy.
they all think that that he's just being. This is what it's all just a failure, as opposed to like, hey, wait a second, are you sure this isn't a grift?
Yeah, that's true.
Are you sure you're not just doing this to rehabilitate yourself so that you can get a job, and you've taken this as far as you could go, and now you realize like it's starting to. Well, it's a net cost to you, that it's not really been an ideology, that it's really just been about like, I'm trying to make money, and I realize like, oh, this leading to nowhere. I'm losing too many jobs. I'm losing too many friends. My wife is mad. I may have to move or something like that. This isn't about a perspective. It's just really just a scam, and I'm just racist enough not to worry about the implications of it, or misogynist enough. However you feel more comfortable talking about it. Whatever it is you think.
There seem to be two type of reactions. One from the type of person that's like, I wouldn't want that heat either, and I would back down. And then the other person is like, lock and load, baby. It's time to defend the Proud Boys.
I think there's somewhere it's just like, you're making the classic mistake. You're giving in to the left.
Or here's the real one. Speaking of white nationalism not existing, so what's wrong? So it's wrong to be white and want to preserve your nation, but is it just? But just to be clear, you can be non-white and want to preserve your nation, right? Part of that non-existent thing that he was talking about earlier.
Controlled Op McGinnis once again defames alt-right conservatives to please his masters in a poetic show of phony surrender to the very deep state, which has employed him as a distraction and a controlled opposition mainstay. I mean, use controlled op twice in one sentence.
Well, I mean, obviously, Gavin was always
it's a bit redundant, a way to put it. Yeah, there we go.
Funneling soy.
Soy funnel.
Soy funnel.
Fat
bitch.
guy, no more. Said war on men. Simple.
That's a key takeaway. Yeah.
There you go.
It's the war on men. I could not because that, by the way, that was a very good, very disturbing movie. And as soon as that guy came on screen in the I, Tonya movie, I just was like, oh my God, this is just
right.
I literally was like reading all of the media landscape that we deal with every day. Like now I have an image for that guy.
Right.
For
the
every
only
single commentator.
Now that guy has the internet.
No,
and
now
he can
that
connect
guy.
With other,
now he is actually a counterinsurgency expert.
Exactly.
He's actually funneling info to Roger Stone.
He's on Fox. Yeah. Calling from a 952 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Ahmed. I'm calling from the Twin Cities.
Ahmed, what's on your mind?
Hi, I just wanted to tell you guys, I called in a couple of months ago about the elections that were going to happen in Minnesota, and well, they're done, and I'm feeling so good, man. Everything went off well here. We basically retained all the executive offices in the state, including the governorship, which was, I told you guys about that guy who was running for the GOP, Jeff Johnson. He was a crazy lunatic guy. And we also managed to hold the Attorney General Keith Ellison's seat with all the controversy that was around that one. Ilhan won in the Minneapolis seat that Keith Ellison vacated. And we picked up we picked up 2 seats, but we lost 2. So it seems like we swapped outstate seats for Twin City seats and exurbs. And everything basically just went off well. The state now seems more firm in the Democratic hands. There was one fly in the ointment where we managed to take the state house, but we don't have the state senate by 1 seat. So I'm just hoping for like some kind of videotape for, a Republican state senator that finds him, like, with his escort or something.
Forward it to us if you find it.
Yes, we'll be happy to promote.
Also, Tina Smith won rewon Franken's seat. I think by more than
11.
Yeah, she won by more than Franken ever won by.
Oh wow, so she
she won by 11. That she was kind of people were nervous about it. She won by 11.
What's her politics
Tim Walz,
like?
the governor, won by 11.
Is she
won by 25.
Wow, is she pretty progressive?
Yeah, and so it seems. Sorry about that. It seems that like the whole state and much of the upper Midwest kind of reverted back to form.
Yes.
And Wisconsin and Michigan are now back under our control, and I'm feeling pretty confident. I'm just so happy, man, because the way they were whipping up sentiment out here, I'm Somali, and the way they were using the whole people who came to Minnesota and trying to use that, especially outstate areas, to whip up votes. It was kind of getting gross.
Yeah. Well, it's going to get a lot worse in about a year. I mean, I think...
no doubt, because Trump came here in 16 when he was running and lost by 1.5. So, yeah, he came really close. It was dangerous. But now I'm really hoping that this thing sorts itself out. We managed to take back everything, but it was a very policy diversion. This guy is causing a lot of damage. So.
Well, I appreciate the update, Ahmed, and I'm glad it worked out well in Minnesota. Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, man.
Also, a great
Bye.
football weekend for Minnesota as the Gophers beat the Badgers to take the Paul Bunyan axe for the first time in 15 years, and the Vikings beat the Packers. That's what I did this weekend.
The Matlack Sports Minute.
I was going to say, we need a sting for that.
I'm just trying to, that's a button for if any new Minnesota listeners see
there you
this
go,
video.
folks. See?
Subscribe.
You get it all. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on sports news out of Minnesota that we update you every 6 to 8 months.
I'm excited
Tell
for
you what has happened.
The high school hockey championships. That's what I'll be looking for.
I'll tell you what, there is just something, this is divergent, but just like the idea of like any historical figure saying like, please like and subscribe. It's hilarious. Also, check out our Patreon page.
Final call for the day. Folks, I'm sorry. We've had people who have been hanging on the phone for over an hour, multiples of you. This is the way the cookie falls. Call from an 802
Light
area
potato
code.
bag.
Call from an 802 area code. Who's this?
Hey, Sam?
Yes.
Hey, this is Sam calling from Vermont.
Sam from Vermont. What's on your mind, Sam?
Not much. Just wanted to talk a little bit. Just got back from Thanksgiving with the family. And not a statistic, but just a point of fact. Out of 4 siblings, there was one of us who's the Trump supporter. He's the only non-college educated white one among us and has lived his whole life up in Vermont, basically not having to deal with any of the issues that he rails against so hard. Just wanted to say, looking to get, any advice you can have on how to talk to someone like that, because, in general, I don't give these people the time of day anymore, but it's tough when they're blood related.
Right.
My big thing is just, kind of fall back on history, kind of really hit home on the whole kind of arc of everything and try to put that in context. And, kind of a little bit kind of taking a page out of your guys' book is reframe the debate to be less about, the thing I tell him is, maybe it is just maybe you've been convinced into believing that these people, it's, this group of people's fault versus the real people's fault that it actually is. But anyway, just any advice you can take, you can give on kind of talking to these people. And I hope that, you keep maybe finding those YouTubers that he listens to and, challenging them to more debates. Anyway,
who does he listen to?
Oh my God. It's bad. He still listens to Stefan Molyneux. Which is just, that guy's batshit crazy.
Yeah, we have a clip. We'll play him tomorrow.
Dixon Hammer.
Who?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he's listening to actual
Dixon
straight
Hammer?
up fascists.
He's the guy who
these
goes
are like
shirtless?
No, these are like
this guy might be too.
He might be a little too far gone.
These are like actual like fascists.
Yeah, these are like people that aren't hiding the ball at all.
Oh, I know. But what's crazy is, a lot of what the listening that these people do is it's like any other podcast where it's just sort of like, the second thing he's doing. So it's just sort of like when I go home, it's just like you can hear it like the background to his life.
He lives in Vermont?
Spouting their bullshit.
He lives in Vermont?
Yep.
So, what exactly, Vermont is not the most heterogeneous population. Like, what is he experiencing that he thinks is a function of what? Of like our multiracial society? I mean, what is he experiencing that is so problematic from his perspective, or is he just talking like more generally?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of what this is about is just not having to experience much of anything is part of the problem. He works with my father. He's like a self-employed plumber. So it's really just like the kind of amount of things he hasn't had to deal with is sort of what defines it the most. But honestly, nothing is the real problem with it. It's just, I think it's just the sort of disaffection of being single guy in his early 20s living in Vermont without much going on.
Yeah. I mean,
your brother sounds like a prick.
I would maintain very low ambitions as to being able to do anything with that. And I would focus in on one or two things that you think is really important to him and just start planting very, very small seeds, because it's going to take a lot of work. Best case scenario, your brother stays sequestered in Vermont, never leaves, and just continues to perfect his plumbing. I mean, that's all I can say is that that could be the best case scenario for America. But for your family, I would just say, plant some seeds. Maybe something happens in his life that he gets a different perspective. But good luck with that, Sam.
Yeah, basically a girlfriend. But anyway, I appreciate it. Thanks for taking my call.
Right. Nothing like I guess applying some type of balm to your incelness than just sort of blaming other races.
Sounds like the woman that said I was too mean to callers. Sounds like another job.
That one guy he mentioned was the indignant Dennis Miller fan that we played that one time. Remember, he was defending Dennis Miller when we made the guy with the long hair. That was one of the guys that he was listening to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that he was actually
He's pretty. At first I thought that guy was doing a bit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought that was a joke
but
too.
He is
was
really fat. It's like sticks and hammers. So the sticks I think are the fascist sticks. So he's a full on
All right, well, folks, I'm sorry. That is it for today. I'm sorry, callers. We've got to go, but we will be back tomorrow for more of it. See you then.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds